To explain the origin of the work, Rabbi Moses ben Leon therefore took the attitude, or held forth the belief, that is more or less contained within the text itself, that the original author was a Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai, a man who wrote the work or compiled it under inspiration about the year 161 A.D., during the reign of the Roman Caesar Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. This Rabbi Simeon was a mystic. To escape Roman persecution, he went into the wilderness and lived in a cave. And here for many years he was supposed to have received mystical experiences, forms of illumination. The prophets of old came to him. He received instruction from the angelic hosts that are referred to in the Pentateuch. As a result of this great length of time in isolation in this cave, he gradually wrote down or transcribed this mystic doctrine. However, of course, Rabbi Simeon did not himself claim that he invented the idea. He did not invent the Kabbalah, nor is it actually demonstrable that he was the first to write on the subject in ancient times. Actually, I think we will have to assume that the Kabbalah more or less accumulated. And all of this accumulation did not take place within the body of ancient Jewry itself. The moment we begin to investigate the subject, we come upon a number of rather interesting possibilities. The date 161 A.D. may be comparatively correct for an important revelation by compilation of certain doctrines that were available in the Near East at that time. The actual structure of the Kabbalah shows that it is profoundly indebted to Gnosticism, the sect that was flourishing at that time in North Africa and in parts of Syria, a sect which has come again into prominence in recent years from the discovery of the great Gnostic library at Chenabastion in Central Egypt. This distant, all-powerful God, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, was scarcely the concept of deity most useful to the Jewish people during the Roman captivity. This God of powers and glories, this El Shaddad, the strong, was not the type of deity that could comfort a sick, forlorn, and miserable, scattered people. Something nearer, something more immediate to their lives was very necessary to them. So it is quite possible that Mahayana Buddhism, which had this tremendous emphasis upon the immediacy of spiritual authority, that it was not something infinitely remote, but something infinitely available. The deity was not far away always, not looking down from an omnipotence upon a tired world, but that in some way deity was here. Deity was therefore immanent. At the same time, we find running through the Kabbalah interesting scientific elements. And most of these elements probably must be traced back to the Greek Pythagoreanism. It is sometimes held now that the Essene community at En-Gedi by the Dead Sea was originally founded by Pythagoras. In any event, the Greek system certainly influenced both the Essene school and the Therapeutae of Egypt. The monadology of Pythagoras, his doctrine of number and numeration, certainly has become so associated with the Kabbalah that today many people, popularly referring to numerology, will call it Qabalism. Certainly the Kabbalah did deal with a philosophic use of number to represent principles, to represent forces and powers, and to reduce universal processes to numerical equivalence. Also, the old idea of reading the meaning of names seems to have risen from this concept. For today, numerologists will take the letters of a person's name and finding the numerical equivalent of these letters, will add them up, place them under the discipline of notoricon and gematria, as it is called in the Kabbalah, come to a sum number composed of the letters of a name, and then attempt to delineate or to variously analyze that person through the number of his name. Also, the ancient Hebrew belief that the days of man's life are numbered. Now, we have always interpreted that to mean that he could only live so long, but that these days might be numbered in some kind of a mathematical or magical manner has not generally occurred to the reader of Scripture. So in the numerical system of Pythagoras and other aspects of Greek philosophy, we find material which later, passing through a certain Judaistic interpretation, was embodied into the structure of their Kabbalah of numbers. Rabbi Akiba, in the Sefer Yetzirah, which was the book of the numerations, also gives us valuable information as to the numerical equivalence of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So here we have another phase of the subject. In Kabbalah also, as it passed particularly down into those dark and mysterious years which we know as the Middle Ages, certain elements of necromancy occurred. And to what degree this was essentially different from the demonism of Europe itself, which was passing through a psychological condition which seemed to make these metaphysical things a little too real. What the relationship was, we do not actually know. But we know that magic mingled with alchemy, that magic is to be found in many of the old Hermetic books, and that the various grimoires, or books of conjuration of spirits, all make use of Kabbalistic elements. Thus the signatures of angels and demons, and all of these mysterious rites by which spirits were invoked out of the misty deep of space. All these came finally to be called Qabalism. Agrippa von Netzheim was one of those scholar mystics, esotericists, who combined magic, Hermetic arts, the Kabbalah, into a strange and mysterious compound, which caused him considerable religious difficulty before he got through with it. But at the same time, the policy was present. This is probably one of the reasons why, after we came out of the Dark Ages into a more modern point of view, that the Kabbalah was held in fear or disrepute. It was because it seemingly had been associated with demonology and witchcraft. It was also used and is still used in some parts of Europe and even in parts of Asia where Jewish communities exist for helping so-called possessed persons to get rid of evil spirits and things of that nature. Let us assume then, for our purpose at this time, that Qabalism really began not necessarily among the Jewish people at all, but certainly it arose in a period extending between the 6th century BC and the 4th century AD. This was the time of the divine right of kings, and most of all the divine right of God to be aloof, distant, to send thunderbolts but seldom appear in person. This situation evidently came head-on into changes developing within the psychological integration of the human being himself. Man was growing. But in spite of these penalties, men kept on. For the search for this immanence could not be blocked. Man gradually came to recognize that it was his right to ask questions, that it was his right to gather, as they did the elders of the Zohar, and sitting down among themselves with their own associates, really, so to say, take the universe apart. That they had right to question, they had right to analyze, they had right to be unorthodox. And that was getting to be pretty dangerous. But they had also the discretion to clothe their researches in some kind of terminology that might appear to indicate a continual and in fact increasing devotion to religious principles. These various elements had to be brought into a pattern, or else in all probabilities these older teachers could not have survived.
Now you understand why I tell you it's not the Jews, folks. If you're persecuting the Jews, you're making a big mistake. It is some of the Jews. It is some of the Catholics. It is some of the atheists. It is some of all of the people of all of the nations and races and religions of the world. And outwardly, if they attend a church in your neighborhood and profess to believe in that religion, it is a lie. It is how they gain influence and power in that community. For they worship one God and one God only in the temple without windows, the headquarters of which in this country is exactly 13 blocks from the White House.